As a descendant of a dynasty once worth $185 billion, nearly half of the total assets held by the U.S. Treasury, Anderson Cooper was born into extraordinary wealth and legacy. His mother was the legendary fashion icon Gloria Vanderbilt, and his father, a respected writer. On paper, he had every advantage to live a life of luxury and ease. To most, that would seem like a blessing, but life did not grant him everything. He faced the pain of losing his father as a child and endured the unbearable tragedy of witnessing his brother take his own life right before his eyes. And instead of living off the Vanderbilt legacy, he chose journalism, starting from school bulletins, earning just enough to get by. No special treatment, no inherited shortcut. Today, he lives in a multi-million-dollar townhouse in Manhattan, drives a classic Aston Martin, and holds a net worth of over $60 million. But the real story lies not in the fortune he holds, but in the path he walked to get there. How does someone born into privilege choose to walk through the storm and yet remain grounded beneath the spotlight? This is the story of Anderson Cooper, one you can't afford to miss. Have you ever wondered why a boy born into luxury would choose to face war, disease, and death, rather than live comfortably in a multi-million-dollar penthouse in Manhattan? Born in 1967, Anderson Cooper is the youngest son of Gloria Vanderbilt, a designer, painter, and heiress of the legendary Vanderbilt dynasty. Coming from a family that once controlled over $185 billion, it seemed Anderson could go his entire life without ever having to touch reality. But from a young age, his life was marked by loss. In 1978, his father, Wyatt Cooper, died of a heart attack. Anderson was only 10, and it was the first time he felt what it meant to lose the one person who made him feel safe, in a world that was opulent but cold. 10 years later, the grief doubled when his beloved older brother, Carter, died by suicide. Anderson was then a student at Yale, holding the phone in his hand, stunned, feeling as if half his heart had just fallen beyond reach. Instead of leaning on the prestige of his family, Anderson stepped away from his comfort zone. At 17, he traveled alone to Africa, sleeping in tents, contracting malaria, lying delirious in a makeshift clinic, calling out for his father and brother. There were no lights, no fame, just a young man trying to find a reason to keep going. After graduating from Yale, he didn't head to Wall Street. He took a quiet, low-paying job as a fact-checker at Channel One News. But it was there he learned to respect every detail, every word. Then, using a fake press badge, he picked up a camcorder and snuck into Myanmar to cover a student uprising. No media outlet sent him. No crew backed him. It was just Anderson and the resolve of someone who had already lost too much to fear anything else. When his mother expressed concern over his dangerous choices, Anderson simply replied, "I need to do this to understand the world, not just live in it." And that was the beginning of his journey to become a voice for the voiceless. He had walked alongside pain, but instead of letting it consume him, Anderson Cooper learned to turn grief into strength. A simple yet profound lesson. No matter what life takes from you, you can still choose to stand and move forward. But how did a boy who once slept on rickety wooden beds become the anchor that millions of Americans listen to each night? Let's find out in the next chapter. What makes a journalist with no personal show, barely a standout at ABC News, become the most trusted face in America, owning a program in his own name, hosting a podcast with millions of listens, and amassing a net worth of $60 million? Anderson Cooper did it, not through gimmicks, but through truth. Anderson Cooper didn't rise to fame by inheritance. He built it from the days he quietly studied Vietnamese in Hanoi, from war reports he filmed himself in Rwanda, and from long nights spent editing footage as an unknown reporter. After graduating from Yale, instead of joining financial firms like many of his peers, Anderson moved to Hanoi, living there for a year in the mid-1990s, when Vietnam was just beginning to open to the world. He did it out of a desire to understand another culture, a choice that proved he wasn't living to be famous, but to experience and empathize. He started his career at Channel One News, bought his own camera, traveled to conflict zones like Bosnia and Somalia, and produced the stories himself. No glamorous backdrops, no support crew, just a young man with a camera and a conviction that these stories deserve to be told. In 1995, Anderson joined ABC News, taking his first steps into mainstream journalism. At a time when television was dominated by icons like Diane Sawyer and Peter Jennings, Anderson was just a diligent reporter, without a clear spotlight. Not much fame, but one thing he always held on to: consistency in storytelling. From the heart, never from bias. A surprising turn came in 2000, when he hosted the reality show The Mole. Many were baffled, but to Anderson, it was a chance to understand the broader public, and that very skill later helped him form deep bonds with TV audiences. Not everyone saw the value in it back then, but Anderson didn't explain. He let time speak for him. In 2001, he returned to journalism with CNN. 2 years later, Anderson Cooper 360 was born. More than just an evening broadcast, it became a space for Anderson to do what he does best: tell the world stories through a human lens. His style was calm, honest, sometimes cool, but always putting people before sensationalism. The defining moment of his career came in 2005, when Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans. While many reporters stayed in the studio, Anderson stood waist-deep in floodwaters, interviewing citizens who had lost everything and confronting officials live on air. In that moment, America realized here was a journalist unafraid to speak the truth. He has since earned 18 Emmy Awards, including one for coverage of Princess Diana's funeral, along with 2 Peabody Awards, one of which was for his Hurricane Katrina reporting. He appears regularly on 60 Minutes, interviewing both presidents and everyday people with equal attentiveness. In 2022, he launched the podcast All There Is, exploring grief and how people move through it. A deeply personal project, it resonated especially with older audiences, because it wasn't just news, it was healing through story. And then, no one questioned whether Anderson had ridden on family fame anymore. With an estimated annual income of $12 to $15 million and a net worth around $60 million, he has built an empire of his own. But the most valuable thing Anderson possesses isn't in numbers. It's the unwavering trust of the public. If Oprah stands for emotion and Seacrest for entertainment energy, then Anderson represents integrity. He doesn't need to raise his voice to be heard, but when he speaks, America listens. And after all that, what does the life of such a man who has both fame and fortune yet still chooses simplicity, actually look like? In the next chapter, we'll step into his world: historic mansions, rare cars, and a life of understated luxury and profound depth. Can you imagine an old firehouse becoming the most stylish residence in Greenwich Village? Or a 210-acre estate in Connecticut used solely for weekend retreats? For Anderson Cooper, that's not extravagance. It's how he builds a world of his own, where every detail carries meaning. Greenwich Village Firehouse, a symbol of quiet luxury in the heart of New York. Not a towering penthouse, not a multi-million-dollar glass tower. Anderson Cooper's New York home is a former firehouse. Step through its heavy wooden doors, and you'll find the original cast-iron spiral staircase, soaring ceilings that welcome natural light, and raw brick walls that have never been painted, all evoking an atmosphere that's industrial, cinematic, and utterly private. Purchased in 2010 for $4.3 million, the over 8,000-square-foot property sits in Greenwich Village, once New York's intellectual and artistic hub. And here, each evening, Anderson opens a bottle of wine and reads the news by the large window, where the only sound is distant traffic. Nothing rushed, nothing ostentatious. Rye House, an English manor tucked in the Connecticut woods. If his Manhattan home is where he works, then Rye House is where he disappears. Bought in 2014 for an estimated $5 to $9 million, the estate feels like it stepped out of a 19th century English novel. A wood-paneled library, limestone fireplaces, a French-style dining hall, and a secret garden, where Anderson often reads in the soft morning light, long before anyone else wakes up. The house spans over 10,000 square feet, hidden within 210 acres of forest. This is not just a home. It's a place where those who've known loss understand that silence is its own form of luxury. Trancoso Hideaway, a hidden gem in Brazil's rainforest. If you've never been to Trancoso, Brazil, you've never truly understood how deeply Anderson Cooper values solitude. No fences, no bodyguards, no high-speed internet, just a wooden house in the jungle, a pool decked in Tatajuba wood, and a round table crafted by a local artisan just for him. Anderson doesn't come here to vacation. He comes here to return, to nature, to birdsong, to the thoughts he never says aloud. A place that's rustic but priceless, because it's made for someone who no longer needs to prove anything to the world. Aston Martin DB5, a classic choice, deeply personal. In his garage sits an Aston Martin DB5, the iconic James Bond car. But to Anderson, it isn't a cinematic symbol, it's a personal decision. The $1 million car still runs on its original engine, with untouched leather seats. On weekends, Anderson drives it across the Hamptons Hills. No radio, no phone. Just the wind through a slightly opened window. In those moments, the man who once stood in Hurricane Katrina's chaos finds a quiet peace, behind the wheel, on an empty road. Porsche 550 Spyder, a memory on four wheels. The 1955 Porsche 550 Spyder in his collection is one of the rarest restorations left. A car forever tied to James Dean, to death, to rebellion. But Anderson keeps it for a different reason. Because this car reminds him of Rwanda, when he carried a camera alone, unknown, uncelebrated. To Anderson, the car represents a fragile dream, one he never let go of. The personal library, a living museum of a storyteller. In his Connecticut home, Anderson owns a rare book collection many call a private museum. First editions of Hemingway, Fitzgerald, limited prints of Capote. Some volumes worth over $100,000. All stored in climate-controlled conditions, never opened to anyone but close family. He rereads them in a whisper, sometimes recording himself, for his son to listen to someday. To Anderson, a rare book is priceless because it preserves time itself. Vintage cameras and battlefield memories. Anderson also collects vintage cameras, especially Leica, the kind war correspondents used in World War II. He owns original, hand-developed black and white prints from the 1940s, some never before published. Many of the photos bring tears to viewers, raw images of war, quiet portraits of humanity. One photo alone cost him nearly $40,000. because it made me feel like I had been there. Old sound systems plus vinyl jazz. His reading room features a vintage European sound system from the 1960s, alongside a rare jazz vinyl collection, from Billie Holiday to Duke Ellington. When night falls, he pours a small bourbon, plays a rare original pressing, and scribbles a few thoughts in a notebook with violet ink. This is understated luxury of the soul. The bespoke suit wardrobe, quietly expensive. Anderson isn't one to flaunt fashion, but his wardrobe includes bespoke suits from Savile Row, Tom Ford, and Ralph Lauren Purple Label, each made to measure, each with custom fabric codes. Some are woven from the finest cashmere wool, priced up to $20,000. But he wears them on CNN as if they were just shirts, never to impress, only because they fit perfectly. From real estate to rare books, from vintage cameras to tailored suits, Anderson Cooper's luxurious life doesn't lie in the noise. It lies in the meticulousness behind every choice. But behind those choices are also the storms of fame, controversies, and pressure. A different chapter of his life, soon to be revealed. What happens when one of America's most beloved journalists suddenly becomes the center of criticism? When honesty, the very value he's always stood for, is questioned by the very public that once trusted him? Fame has always been a double-edged sword. For Anderson Cooper, a man who's spent his life upholding credibility in a profession built on shifting ground, becoming the subject of controversy was never going to be easy. But it's the way he faced it, calm, without excuse, that revealed his true character. Town Hall with Donald Trump. A neutral stage turned into chaos. In May 2023, Anderson hosted CNN's Town Hall with former President Donald Trump, an event held just ahead of the 2024 midterms as CNN attempted to create a neutral political forum. But things quickly spun out of control. Trump repeatedly made provocative statements, mocked his opponents, and interrupted Anderson. Many viewers felt the show had become Trump's personal stage. Heath Olbermann and other journalists criticized Anderson for failing to contain Trump, calling it a low point for CNN. On Twitter, Anderson responded briefly, "I wasn't pleased, but journalism is not silence." A restrained but resolute reply. The Vanderbilt legacy. Questions met with composed silence. When Gloria Vanderbilt passed away in 2019, Anderson revealed he inherited around $1.5 million, most of her estate having been placed in art foundations, trusts, and personal collections. Some tabloids raised doubts. Did he really receive only that much? Anderson simply smiled during an interview and said, "If I wanted to be rich off my mother, I wouldn't have gone into journalism." From Cornelius Vanderbilt's $185 billion empire, only a fading legacy remains. And Anderson, the one who never lived in its shadow, is the one who preserved its core values. Coming out, a quiet step with resounding weight. In 2012, Anderson publicly came out as gay through a short letter to the Daily Beast. At the time, same-sex marriage was still not legal in much of the U.S., and for a journalist of his stature with a primetime CNN show, the decision was seen as bold. Some conservative viewers turned away, even sending letters of protest to CNN. But Anderson didn't waver. He didn't hold a press conference, didn't appear on talk shows to defend himself. He simply wrote, "I believe in privacy, but I also believe that living honestly is important." Composure. A signature in the age of emotional media. Not everyone connects with Anderson's calm delivery. Younger viewers sometimes wish he'd show more emotion, especially when reporting on tragedy or disaster. But for older generations, those who remember Walter Cronkite or Tom Brokaw, it's that very composure that marks a real journalist. No theatrics, no bias, and no emotion clouding the truth. Steady through the storm. When asked once about the backlash after the Trump town hall, Anderson said simply, "My job isn't to protect my image. My job is to protect the truth." No grand statements, no PR spin. Just a man sitting quietly in his CNN office, staring at an old photograph of himself with his father, as if to remind himself why he began this path in journalism. Scandal does not define Anderson Cooper. The way he stood firm through the storm, with truth as his compass, is what sets him apart. And that legacy we'll uncover in the final chapter. But after all the controversies, what does Anderson leave behind for the world? A man once criticized for his honesty. How is he now shaping a legacy of his own? Let's find out in the final part. Some people leave behind mansions, fortunes, and titles. Others leave behind quiet strength, compassion, and an impact that can't be measured in numbers. Anderson Cooper belongs to the latter. Over 3 decades in journalism, Anderson hasn't just delivered the news, he's delivered meaning. And more importantly, he's acted. Quiet acts of kindness, off camera, by choice. After the devastating tsunami in Sri Lanka in 2004, Anderson was not only one of the first journalists to report from the ground, he also donated part of the proceeds from his book, Dispatches from the Edge, to support local relief organizations. It's a gesture rarely mentioned. He has quietly supported the Elton John AIDS Foundation, attending private fundraisers and contributing hundreds of thousands of dollars, according to media estimates. And with the American Stroke Association, a cause close to his heart since his father's passing, Anderson has taken part in campaigns to raise awareness of cardiovascular health, turning personal loss into public good. Sharing not to boast, but to inspire. Anderson never founded his own charity. Instead, he chose to share his lived experiences through books, documentaries, and most recently, the podcast All There Is. The show explores grief, the emptiness that follows the loss of loved ones, and how people slowly find ways to heal. The podcast has drawn millions of listeners, especially among middle-aged and older audiences, becoming a quiet place of healing in an increasingly noisy world. Education, a legacy of mentorship. Anderson's book, Dispatches from the Edge, has been included in the curriculum of several journalism schools, including Columbia Journalism School. Not for its writing technique, but for the spirit it carries. That journalism isn't just about reporting facts, but about preserving human dignity. He's often invited to speak with students, not to list his achievements, but to talk about perseverance, about the early days when no one knew his name, and about why being allowed to speak the truth is a privilege. Fatherhood, the most meaningful role of all. For Anderson, his greatest legacy may well be his 2 sons, Wyatt and Sebastian. Despite a packed schedule, he makes time every evening to read, talk, and simply be present. He doesn't plan to leave them a vast fortune, just the values that matter. I don't know what they'll remember me for. I just hope they remember that I was there. Not as a journalist, but as their dad. And that, perhaps, the quiet, steady presence, is the greatest gift a person can leave the world. Anderson Cooper teaches us that legacy isn't what you own, it's what you leave in the hearts of others. A lesson for anyone, at any age. What do you think Anderson's legacy is? Leave a comment, hit like, and subscribe to discover more inspiring stories like this one.